Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. I'm Jack. I don't usually post stuff like this, but I've been through a lot recently, and I need to get it off my chest. Maybe some of you can relate or even give me some advice. Growing up, my parents taught me that loyalty and hard work were the keys to a good life. My dad was a steelworker, always coming home late with grease-stained hands, and my mom was a teacher who spent her nights grading papers at the kitchen table. They were tough but loving, and they showed me what it meant to sacrifice for family. I carried those lessons into my adulthood. When I met Charlene, I thought I'd found someone who shared those same values. She had this way about her, funny, smart, and driven. We got married, built a life, and raised two beautiful daughters, Allison and Grace. Together, we ran a small business. It wasn't easy, but we made it work. Or at least, I thought we did. Looking back, there were signs, small cracks in the foundation of our marriage. But I was too busy to notice. Between the business and the kids, I didn't have time to sit and question her late nights or the sudden secrecy with her phone. I trusted her. I believed in her. I thought she was my partner in every sense of the word. That illusion shattered 6 months ago. It was an ordinary day, too ordinary for what was about to happen. Charlene had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she went to pick up the girls. I wasn't snooping, but an email notification popped up. The subject line was, "Can't wait to see you again." My stomach dropped. I knew I shouldn't, but I clicked. The email was from a man named Greg. I didn't know him, but the words on the screen told me everything I needed to know. "Last night was amazing," he wrote. "I love how alive you make me feel. I can't stop thinking about you." He signed off with a stupid heart emoji. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my hands shaking. This couldn't be real. Not Charlene, not my Charlene. The woman I'd built a life with. The mother of my children. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it could be a misunderstanding. But deep down I knew. When she got home, I confronted her. I held up the laptop and asked her to explain. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she folded her arms and said, "It's not what you think." Those words. "It's not what you think." They echoed in my head like some twisted mantra. I asked her to tell me exactly what it was then. She hesitated, her face flushed, before finally admitting, "I've been seeing someone else." I can't describe the feeling that followed. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. I'd been betrayed in the worst way by the person I trusted the most. But the worst part wasn't just the affair, it was the way she acted like it wasn't a big deal. Like she had a right to do this to me, to us. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with questions. How long had this been going on? Did she ever love me? What about our kids? I needed answers, but more than that, I needed a plan. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to let this destroy me. My daughters deserved better. I deserved better. This was just the beginning of the fight for my family and my future. The next day, I woke up early, though I hadn't slept much. Charlene acted like nothing had happened. She cooked breakfast, chatting with Allison and Grace as if our world wasn't crumbling. I watched her, feeling like I didn't even know who she was anymore. After the girls left for school, I asked her to sit down. I needed the truth. All of it. No more excuses, no more half-admissions. She rolled her eyes, but I stayed calm. I told her if she didn't give me the answers I needed, I'd find them myself. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. She hesitated, but finally said, "About a year." A year. An entire year of lies. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt, but I forced myself to stay in control. "Who is he?" "Greg," she replied flatly. "We met at a business conference." Of course. I remembered that conference. I'd encouraged her to go, thinking it would be good for the business. I'd stayed home with the girls, working late nights to keep things running smoothly. Meanwhile, she was meeting Greg. "Is it serious?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. She shrugged, as if we were talking about the weather. "It's not like I'm in love with him." That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. The casual way she said it, like this was some minor slip-up instead of a betrayal of everything we'd built together, it made my blood boil. "Do the girls know?" I asked. "No," she snapped. And I'd appreciate it if you didn't drag them into this. Her audacity floored me. She was the one who had blown up our marriage, and now she was acting like I was the problem? I didn't say anything for a while. I just stared at her, trying to process what she'd become. Finally, I said, "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop seeing him. Immediately. And we're going to counseling." She laughed bitterly. "You can't tell me what to do, Jack. I'm not some possession you can control." Her words hit me like a slap, but I stood my ground. "No, Charlene. I can't control you. But I can control what happens to our family. If you care about the girls at all, you'll at least try to fix this." She didn't respond, just crossed her arms and stared at the floor. I realized then that I was fighting for someone who wasn't willing to fight for me. For us. I spent the rest of the day going through every financial document, every business account, every piece of property we owned together. I wasn't going to let her ruin me the way she'd ruined our marriage. My parents always said to hope for the best but prepare for the worst, and I took that lesson to heart. Later that night, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. If there was more to this story, I needed to know. Not for revenge, but to protect myself and my daughters. When I saw Charlene that evening, sitting on the couch like nothing was wrong, I felt a new kind of resolve. This wasn't going to break me. It was going to transform me. I would come out of this stronger, for me and for my kids. The private investigator worked fast. Within a week, he handed me a thick envelope. I opened it in the car, parked in a spot far from home. My hands trembled as I flipped through the photos and printed emails. It was worse than I imagined. There were pictures of Charlene meeting Greg at a hotel, smiling, holding hands, looking carefree. The timestamp showed it was just 3 weeks ago, on a day she told me she had an urgent client meeting. The emails were explicit, full of plans for secret getaways and confessions that made me sick to my stomach. One line stood out: "I wish I'd met you before, Jack. My life would have been so different." That hit hard. I'd spent over a decade building a life with Charlene. And now? She wished I didn't exist. I didn't drive home right away. I needed to calm down to think. The girls were waiting for me, and I didn't want them to see me like this. They didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. When I finally walked through the door, Allison and Grace were at the dining table, working on homework. "Hey, Dad." Grace chirped, running over to hug me. I held her tight, grateful for the innocence she still had. Allison gave me a small smile, her teenager moodiness making her less affectionate these days, but I knew she cared. Charlene wasn't in the living room. She was upstairs, likely on her phone. I took a deep breath and joined the girls at the table. For the next hour, I helped with math problems and listened to Grace tell a long-winded story about her day at school. It was exactly what I needed to ground myself. After the girls went to bed, I went upstairs. Charlene was lying on the bed, scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, she looked irritated. "What?" she asked, like I'd interrupted something important. I tossed the envelope onto the bed. "This," I said simply. She hesitated before picking it up. Her face paled as she flipped through the photos and emails. "You had me followed," she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "You gave me no choice," I replied. "I needed to know the truth, because you sure as hell weren't giving it to me." Charlene threw the envelope onto the bed and crossed her arms. "This is invasive, Jack. You can't just spy on me like I'm some criminal." "Don't turn this around on me," I snapped. "You lied to me. You cheated on me. And now you're trying to play the victim." She glared at me but said nothing. For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan. "I want you out," I finally said. "Pack a bag and go. Tonight." Her eyes widened. "You can't be serious. What about the girls? They need their mother. They need stability," I countered. "And right now that's not you. You can come back when we figure out what's next, but for now, I need space." And so do they. Charlene started to argue but stopped when she saw the look on my face. Something in her eyes shifted, anger, maybe fear, but she didn't fight me. She grabbed a suitcase and began stuffing clothes into it. As she zipped it up, she muttered, "This is going to ruin everything." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You already did that." When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty doorway. The house felt quieter than ever, but for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. The first night without Charlene felt surreal. I sat on the couch with the TV on, but I wasn't watching. My thoughts were spinning. Every creak in the house felt louder, more noticeable. The emptiness was suffocating, even though it was exactly what I'd asked for. I went upstairs to check on the girls. Grace was asleep, her little stuffed dog tucked under her arm. Allison's light was still on, so I knocked softly and peeked inside. She was sitting on her bed, scrolling through her phone. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She shrugged. "Yeah, just tired." Her tone was flat, but her eyes told a different story. She was a smart kid, too smart. She knew something was wrong. "Listen," I said, stepping into the room. "Mom had to go stay somewhere for a bit. It's grown-up stuff. But I promise, your sister and I are here for you. Always." She nodded slowly, not looking at me. "Is she coming back?" I didn't know how to answer that. "We'll figure it out," I said finally. "But for now, let's just focus on us, okay?" "Okay," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I kissed her on the forehead and left her room, my heart heavy. I'd promised myself I'd shield them from this mess, but it was already leaking through the cracks. The next few days were a whirlwind of routine and awkward adjustments. I threw myself into work, making sure the business didn't falter. I had to keep things steady, if not for me, then for my girls. Charlene texted a few times, asking about the girls, but I kept my responses short. I wasn't ready to have a real conversation with her yet. Then came Friday. I'd taken the girls out for pizza, hoping to distract them with something fun. Grace was her usual bubbly self, talking non-stop about school. Allison, on the other hand, picked at her food, barely saying a word. "Ally, you've got to eat," I said, trying to keep the mood light. "I'm not hungry," she muttered, pushing her plate away. I sighed. "What's going on, kiddo? Talk to me." She looked up, her eyes wet. "Why is Mom gone?" she asked bluntly. "Did you guys have a fight?" Grace froze, her wide eyes darting between me and her sister. This wasn't how I wanted this conversation to happen, but I couldn't dodge it forever. "Your mom and we're working through some things," I said carefully. "It doesn't mean we don't love you or your sister. That will never change." "Is she coming back?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. I reached across the table and held both their hands. "I don't know," I admitted. "But no matter what happens, you two are my top priority. Always." They nodded, though I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. It crushed me, but I knew honesty was better than false promises. That weekend, I made it a point to focus on them. We baked cookies, watched movies, and even tackled a puzzle that had been gathering dust in the closet. Slowly, I could feel a tiny sense of normalcy creeping back in. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Sunday evening, after the girls were in bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the financial papers spread out in front of me. I'd been reviewing our accounts and business assets, making sure everything was secure. I wasn't about to let Charlene's choices jeopardize the future I'd worked so hard to build. As I shuffled through the paperwork, my phone buzzed. It was Charlene. "Charlene, can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Me, not yet." I needed time. Time to rebuild the walls she'd torn down. Time to figure out what the hell came next. A week after Charlene left, the house felt less chaotic, though the silence still felt unnatural. I'd fallen into a new rhythm, managing the business, making school lunches, and doing my best to keep the girls' spirits up. It was far from perfect, but we were getting through it. One afternoon, while sorting through the mail, I came across a familiar name, Shaunana. She was an old colleague, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Back when Charlene and I first started our business, Shaunana worked with me on a few big projects. We'd lost touch after she moved out of state, but she was always someone I respected. The envelope was handwritten. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a simple card with her phone number and a note. "Hey Jack, heard through the grapevine you've had a rough time lately. If you ever want to catch up or talk, give me a call. Shaunana." It caught me off guard. I hadn't talked to anyone outside of my immediate circle about what was happening, but somehow, word had traveled. Part of me wanted to shove the card into a drawer and forget about it. I wasn't sure I was ready to open up to anyone, even someone I trusted. But later that night, as I stared at the ceiling in bed, I decided to reach out. The next day, during my lunch break, I dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring. Jack. Long time no talk, she said, her voice warm and familiar. Hey, Shaunana. Got your card, I said, a little awkwardly. Thanks for reaching out. Of course, she said. How are you holding up? I hesitated. It's been a rough few weeks. I can imagine, she said gently. Do you want to grab coffee? No pressure, but sometimes it helps to talk. I surprised myself by agreeing. We set a time for the next day at a cafe downtown. When I walked into the cafe, Shaunana was already there, sipping a latte and scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, waving me over. Jack, she said, standing up to hug me. It's so good to see you. You too, I said, sitting down across from her. We spent the first few minutes catching up, her new job, her move back to town, how much our kids had grown. It was easy, natural, like no time had passed. But eventually, the conversation turned to why we were there. So, she said, leaning forward. You don't have to share if you're not ready, but I'm here if you need a listening ear. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Charlene cheated, I said bluntly. It's been going on for a year, and I didn't find out until recently. Shaunana's eyes widened, her expression a mix of shock and sympathy. Jack. I'm so sorry. That's awful. Yeah, I said, staring at my coffee. I've been trying to keep it together for the girls, but honestly, I feel like I'm barely holding on. She nodded, her gaze steady. You're doing the best you can, and that's all anyone can ask. But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. We talked for nearly an hour. I told her about the private investigator, Charlene's cold indifference, and my fears for the future. She listened without interrupting, offering thoughtful advice here and there but mostly letting me vent. By the time we left the cafe, I felt lighter. Not fixed, not whole, but lighter. Shaunana gave me a hug and said, anytime you need to talk, I'm here. Over the next few weeks, we stayed in touch. She checked in every few days, and we met up a couple more times for coffee. It wasn't romantic, at least, not yet, but her support meant more to me than I could express. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt like I wasn't carrying the weight alone. But Charlene wasn't done making things complicated. Just as life was starting to feel a little steadier, Charlene dropped another bomb. I was at the business one afternoon, going over inventory, when my phone buzzed with a text from her. Charlene, we need to talk about custody. I want to discuss a more balanced arrangement. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. What did she mean by balanced? I'd been the one holding things together, managing the girls' routines while she'd been off doing God knows what. The thought of her swooping back in to disrupt their lives made my blood boil. I texted back, trying to keep my frustration in check. What exactly are you proposing? Her reply came quickly. I want 50/50ths. It's what's fair. Fair. The word grated on me. Was it fair when she walked out on our family? Was it fair when she put our daughter's stability at risk? I needed time to process, so I didn't reply right away. Instead, I called my lawyer, David. David was the same attorney I'd consulted after Charlene moved out. He'd helped me secure temporary custody of the girls and offered advice on protecting our assets. When I explained the situation, he sighed. This isn't uncommon, he said. She's likely feeling pressure to re-establish her role as a parent, especially if she thinks it'll help her in court. But that doesn't mean she's automatically entitled to 50/50ths. What are my chances of keeping primary custody? I asked. It depends, he said. Judges prioritize the best interests of the children. If you can show that you've been the primary caregiver and that the girls are thriving in your care, you'll have a strong case. But if Charlene pushes, it could get messy. Messy was the last thing I wanted, but I wasn't about to roll over. The girls needed stability, and I wasn't convinced Charlene could provide that right now. A few days later, Charlene and I met at a neutral location, David's office. She walked in wearing her usual confidence, but I could see the tension in her eyes. She wasn't used to being on the back foot, and it clearly rattled her. We sat across the table, David between us, as she laid out her case. Jack, I know I've made mistakes, she began, her tone measured. But I'm still their mother. I want to be there for them just as much as you are. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm but firm. Charlene, this isn't about punishing you. It's about what's best for Allison and Grace. They need consistency, and right now that's me. She bristled. You think I'm inconsistent? I think, I said carefully, that uprooting their lives every other week isn't what they need right now. The conversation went back and forth, tense but civil. David guided us through the legal framework, explaining the options and the potential outcomes. In the end, we agreed to revisit the discussion in a few months, giving Charlene time to demonstrate her commitment. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it bought me time, and that was enough for now. That night, as I tucked Grace into bed, she asked, "When's Mom coming home?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "She's figuring some things out," I said finally. "But no matter what, you and Allison will always have me." She nodded, her little face serious. "I like it when it's just us, Daddy. It feels safe." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Safe. That was my job now, to make sure they always felt safe, no matter what chaos surrounded us. The next morning, I got a text from Shanana. "Hey, thinking about you. How did the meeting with Charlene go?" I smiled, grateful for her steady presence. "It was a lot," I replied. "I'll tell you about it over coffee." Her response came quickly. "Name the time and place." As much as Charlene's custody push rattled me, I felt a sense of clarity settling in. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was planning, preparing, rebuilding. And I wasn't doing it alone. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, Greg, the man Charlene had been seeing, re-entered the picture. I should have seen it coming, but it still hit me like a freight train. It started with another text from Charlene. "Charlene, Greg wants to be involved in the girls' lives. We need to discuss this." I stared at my phone, stunned. Greg? Involved with my daughters? The idea made my skin crawl. This was a man who had been complicit in the destruction of my marriage, and now he wanted a seat at the table? I called Charlene immediately. She answered on the second ring. "Jack," she said, her tone cautious. "What exactly does Greg wants to be involved mean?" I asked, my voice tight. "He feels like he should meet them," she replied. "If we're moving forward with co-parenting, it's only fair." Fair. That word again. "Charlene, this man helped you destroy our family. Now you want to introduce him to our kids? Are you out of your mind?" She sighed, like I was the unreasonable one. "Jack, I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you it's going to happen." My grip on the phone tightened. Over my dead body. That evening, I sat down with David to figure out my options. He listened carefully as I explained the situation. "Legally, you can't control who she introduces to the kids during her parenting time," he said. "But you can argue that introducing Greg right now could be disruptive and not in the children's best interests." I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. "Do I have a chance of stopping this?" "It depends," he admitted. "If Charlene pushes it, the courts might side with her, especially if she frames it as part of her life moving forward. But if you can show that it's too soon, or that it would harm the girls emotionally, a judge might agree to delay it." I felt a spark of hope, but it was faint. The system didn't always favor the parent trying to keep things stable. The next weekend, Charlene dropped by to pick up the girls for an afternoon outing. I hadn't told them about Greg's potential involvement. I didn't want to burden them with adult problems. But when Charlene arrived, Grace blurted out, "Mommy, are we meeting someone new today?" My head whipped toward Charlene. "What is she talking about?" I demanded. Charlene avoided my eyes, crouching down to tie Grace's shoe. "It's nothing," she said. "Just a friend." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Don't lie to me. Are you introducing them to Greg today?" She straightened, her expression defiant. "It's none of your business, Jack." "The hell it isn't," I snapped. "I'm their father." The tension between us was palpable, but I couldn't make a scene in front of the girls. I leaned in, my voice a harsh whisper. "If you do this without talking to me first, I'll take this to court." Charlene's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She ushered the girls into her car and drove off, leaving me fuming on the driveway. That night, I called Shanana. I hadn't intended to. Part of me felt like I was leaning on her too much, but I needed to vent. She answered with her usual warmth. "Hey Jack," she said. "What's going on?" "Charlene wants to introduce the girls to Greg," I said, the words spilling out in a rush. "It's too soon, Shanana. They're still adjusting to all of this, and now she wants to throw him into the mix." Shanana was quiet for a moment. "That's a lot," she said finally. How are the girls handling it? They don't know the full story, I admitted. Grace is too young to understand, and Allison's already withdrawn enough as it is. This will only make things worse. Have you told Charlene that? She asked. Of course, I said. But she doesn't care. She's more concerned about what's fair for her and Greg than what's best for our kids. Shanana sighed. You're doing the right thing by fighting this. Just don't lose sight of the bigger picture. The girls need you to be their anchor, no matter what Charlene does. Her words stuck with me long after we hung up. I couldn't control Charlene, but I could control how I showed up for my daughters. The following week, Charlene called. I've decided not to introduce Greg yet, she said abruptly. But this isn't over, Jack. Eventually, they'll meet him. Her tone was sharp, like she wanted me to argue. But I didn't take the bait. Good, I said simply. Let's keep it that way, for their sake. For now, the storm had passed. But I knew it was only a matter of time before Charlene tested the boundaries again. A couple of weeks passed, and things were relatively calm. Charlene hadn't brought up Greg again, and I was focused on creating a sense of normalcy for the girls. Allison seemed to come out of her shell little by little, and Grace, in her usual bubbly way, acted like nothing had changed. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. Then came the email. It was from Charlene's lawyer. The subject line read, "Proposed custody changes." My stomach tightened as I opened it. The email outlined her formal request for a 50-50 custody arrangement and included a proposed schedule. It was polished, professional, and cold. No explanation, no personal note, just a demand. I printed the email and brought it to David that afternoon. He read it carefully, his face unreadable. This was expected, he said, setting the papers down. But I'll be honest, if she pushes for this in court, it could go either way. She can't just waltz back in and split time after everything she's done, I said, frustration bubbling up. The girls need consistency, and I've been the one providing that. I agree, David said. But the courts might see her efforts to be involved as a positive step, especially if she can show she's stable now. Stable. That word echoed in my mind. Charlene had been anything but stable, and yet I felt like I was the one on trial. What can I do to fight this? I asked. David leaned forward. You'll need to document everything. Show that you've been the primary caregiver, that the girls are thriving under your care, and that any major changes could disrupt their well-being. It felt overwhelming, but I wasn't about to let Charlene steamroll her way into a custody agreement that put our daughters at risk. I left David's office more determined than ever. That night, after the girls went to bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos. There we were, Charlene and I, smiling at Allison's first soccer game, holding newborn Grace, cutting the ribbon at the grand opening of our business. It was like looking at a stranger. I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear my phone buzz at first. When I finally picked it up, I saw a text from Shanana. Shanana, how are you holding up today? I hesitated before typing back. Rough day. Charlene's pushing for 50-50 custody. Her reply came quickly. That's tough. Do you want to talk? Part of me wanted to brush it off, to deal with this alone like I always had. But another part, the part that had come to value Shanana's steady support, said yes. We met at the same cafe the next day. She greeted me with a warm smile and a hug, and for a moment, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten. I brought reinforcements, she said, setting a plate of cookies on the table between us. Chocolate chip, your favorite. I couldn't help but smile. You remembered. Of course, she said, her eyes kind. Now tell me what's going on. I laid it all out, the email from Charlene's lawyer, the advice from David, my fears about what this fight would do to the girls. Shanana listened intently, her expression soft but focused. You're doing everything right, she said when I finished. The fact that you're putting the girls first speaks volumes. Just keep doing what you're doing, Jack. Her confidence in me was like a bomb. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. The following week, I received an unexpected call. It was from Grace's teacher, Mrs. Hendricks. Hi, Mr. Monroe, she began. I just wanted to touch base about Grace. She's been a little more withdrawn than usual lately. Nothing major, but I thought you should know. The news hit me hard. Grace was usually so cheerful, so full of life. If even she was feeling the weight of all this, what did that say about how the girls were really doing? That night, I sat down with Allison and Grace after dinner. "Hey," I said gently. "How are you two feeling about everything? Is there anything you want to talk about?" Allison shrugged, but Grace hesitated. Finally, she said, "I miss how things used to be." Her words cut deep, but I nodded. "I know, sweetheart. Me too. But no matter what, we're going to get through this. Together." As I tucked them into bed that night, I made a silent promise. I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting for their happiness, their stability, their future. Whatever it took, I'd make sure they knew they were loved and protected. A couple of days after my talk with the girls, I decided to treat myself to something I hadn't had in a long time, an evening out. Nothing fancy, just a trip to a nearby diner where they made the best burgers in town. I needed a breather, a place to sit and think without the weight of the house pressing down on me. The diner was quiet, its usual hum of chatter replaced by the soft clinking of dishes. I found a booth near the back, ordered my food, and pulled out my phone to check emails. As I scrolled, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Jack." I turned, and there she was, Shaunana. She was holding a to-go bag and wearing a surprised smile. "Shaunana," I said, a little caught off guard but genuinely happy to see her. "What are you doing here?" She shrugged, holding up the bag. "I was craving their onion rings. What about you?" "Needed a break," I admitted. "Figured I'd grab a burger and clear my head." She hesitated for a moment before asking, "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," I said, sliding over to make room. She sat down across from me, setting her bag on the table. "It's funny running into you here," she said. "I used to come here all the time back when I lived in town." "Me too," I said. "This place hasn't changed a bit." We fell into easy conversation, talking about everything from old memories to the latest movies. For the first time in weeks, I found myself laughing, really laughing. It was like a pressure valve had been released, and I could just be myself without the constant weight of everything hanging over me. Eventually, the conversation shifted back to my situation. "How are the girls holding up?" Shaunana asked, her tone softer. "They're managing," I said. "But it's hard. Grace is starting to show signs that she's struggling, and Allison's still keeping her guard up." Shaunana nodded thoughtfully. "It's a lot for them to process. But they're lucky to have you. You're doing everything you can to make them feel secure." "Thanks," I said, the words warming me more than I expected. "I just wish I could shield them from all of this." "They're stronger than you think," she said. "And so are you." Her words lingered with me long after we said our goodbyes. As I drove home that night, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about finding moments of joy and connection, even in the midst of chaos. The next morning, I woke up feeling a rare sense of clarity. I couldn't control everything Charlene did, but I could control how I approached the situation. I could fight for my daughters, for their stability, and for the life we deserved. When Charlene called later that day to discuss the upcoming mediation session, I stayed calm. "We'll talk then," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "But my focus is on what's best for the girls." She sighed, clearly frustrated. "And you think that's only you?" "I think it's the environment they've had for the past few months," I said. "That's what they need right now." The conversation ended there, but I felt a sense of resolve. Whatever came next, I was ready. That weekend, Shaunana stopped by the house with a batch of brownies. The girls loved her immediately, especially Grace, who peppered her with questions about everything from her favorite color to her opinion on the latest Disney movie. Watching them laugh and chat, I felt a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the hardest times, there were moments worth holding on to. The day of mediation came quicker than I expected. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple button-down shirt and slacks. I wanted to look put together, but not like I was trying too hard. This wasn't about winning, it was about doing right by my daughters. Charlene was already seated when I arrived. She glanced at me briefly but didn't say anything. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with a calm, steady demeanor, welcomed us and explained the process. We'd have a chance to share our perspectives and work toward an agreement without the need for a court ruling. Charlene started first. She spoke about how she wanted to rebuild her relationship with the girls, claiming 50-50 custody would be fair and balanced. Her words were polished, rehearsed. I recognized the tone she used when she was trying to close a deal for the business. When it was my turn, I stayed measured. "I'm not here to shut Charlene out," I said, glancing at her briefly. "But the girls have been through a lot. They need stability, And right now, I'm the one providing that. Changing their routine would only add to their stress. The mediator asked a few questions, mostly about the girls' schedules and how we'd been handling co-parenting so far. I made sure to highlight the importance of consistency and the bond I'd maintained with them. By the end of the session, we hadn't reached a final agreement, but there was progress. Charlene reluctantly agreed to hold off on 50-50 custody for now, allowing us to revisit the issue in 6 months. It wasn't a victory, but it was enough to protect the girls' current routine. That evening, I took the girls out for ice cream to celebrate a small win. Grace giggled as her cone dripped onto her hands, and even Allison cracked a smile. Watching them, I felt a sense of peace. For now they were safe, and that was all that mattered. A few weeks after mediation, things were starting to feel somewhat normal again. The girls were settling into their routines, and I felt like I could finally breathe. But, as usual, Charlene found a way to stir things up. She called me one evening after the girls were asleep. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself for whatever she had to say. "Jack, we need to talk," she started, her voice clipped. "This arrangement isn't working for me." "What arrangement?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew where this was going. "The one where you control everything," she snapped. "I can't just sit back and watch you dictate my relationship with my daughters." "Charlene, this isn't about control," I said evenly. "It's about doing what's best for the girls." "And you think that's shutting me out?" she fired back. "I'm their mother, Jack. I deserve equal time with them." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. We agreed to revisit this in 6 months. The girls are adjusting, and disrupting that now would hurt them. Her tone turned icy. "If you won't agree to 50-50 custody now, I'll take it to court." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I stayed quiet for a moment, choosing my next words carefully. "If that's what you want, Charlene, then do it," I said finally. "But know this, I'll fight for them with everything I have." She was silent for a moment before hanging up. I sat there in the quiet house, the weight of her ultimatum settling over me. The next morning, I called David and told him everything. "She's threatening court," I said. "What do we do?" "We prepare," he replied. "Gather documentation, witness statements, anything that shows the girls are thriving under your care. And stay consistent, that will work in your favor." As frustrating as the situation was, I felt a sense of clarity. Charlene might think she could bulldoze her way back into 50-50 custody, but I wasn't going to let her disrupt the girls' lives without a fight. That weekend, I took the girls to the park. Watching them laugh and play, I reminded myself why this battle mattered. They deserved stability, love, and a safe space to grow. I would make sure they had it, no matter what. A week after Charlene's ultimatum, I got an unexpected call from my mother-in-law. She hadn't reached out much since everything happened, so seeing her name on my phone made me hesitate. "Still," I answered. "Jack," she began, her tone softer than I expected. "I just wanted to check in. I know things have been difficult." "Yeah," I said cautiously. "They have." She sighed. "I won't excuse what Charlene did, but I've been thinking about the girls. They need stability, and frankly, I don't think Charlene's ready to provide that right now." I blinked, surprised. "I appreciate you saying that. I've talked to her," she continued. "Tried to make her see reason. But you know how she can be." I did know. Charlene was stubborn, and when she felt backed into a corner, she'd double down. Still, hearing her own mother side with me was unexpected. "If there's anything I can do," she added, "let me know." Her support meant more than I could express, but I kept it simple. "Thank you. That means a lot." After the call, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I wasn't as alone in this fight as I thought. That evening, as I helped Grace with a puzzle and Allison with a school project, I reminded myself that this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about doing what was best for them. And now, with an unexpected ally in my corner, I felt just a little more confident about what lay ahead. It didn't take long for Charlene to react to her mother's involvement. A few days later, she called me, her voice sharp and accusing. "Did you talk to my mom about this?" she demanded. "No," I replied honestly. She called me. "Well, she's suddenly acting like you're the perfect parent and I'm not good enough." "What did you say to her?" "Nothing she didn't already know," I said, keeping my tone calm. "She sees the same thing I do, the girls need stability." Charlene scoffed. "Stability? Is that your excuse for keeping them from me?" I'm not keeping them from you, I said evenly. I'm protecting their routines and their well-being. You agreed to wait before changing custody, remember? She didn't respond right away, but I could hear her breathing, sharp and angry. This isn't over, Jack. I know, I said simply, and the line went dead. That night, I found myself replaying the conversation in my head, trying to figure out what Charlene's next move would be. It was exhausting, always bracing for the next fight, but I couldn't let my guard down. Not now. Instead of dwelling on it, I turned my focus to the girls. Grace was building a fort in the living room, while Allison was curled up with a book. They didn't know about the battles happening behind the scenes, and I intended to keep it that way. For now they were happy, and that was enough. The weeks leading up to the court date were a blur of preparation. David and I spent hours gathering evidence, school reports, notes from teachers, and even statements from neighbors who'd seen how involved I was with the girls. Every piece of documentation felt like armor for the fight ahead. Charlene, meanwhile, was quiet. Too quiet. She hadn't called or texted, which made me uneasy. I knew she wasn't backing down, but the silence was unsettling. One evening, as I was reviewing the case file, Allison came into the kitchen. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "is Mom mad at us?" I set the file down and turned to her. "No, sweetheart. Why would you think that?" "She's just distant," she said. "And Grace keeps asking why she doesn't stay longer." My heart ached hearing this. "Mom's figuring some things out," I said carefully. "But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. Both of you." Allison nodded, though her expression was doubtful. I knew she understood more than she let on, but I didn't press. Protecting her innocence felt like the only gift I could still give her. The next morning, David called with news. Charlene's lawyer had filed an updated motion, arguing that the girls needed more exposure to their mother's presence. It was a thinly veiled jab at the temporary custody agreement. "She's building her case," David said. "But so are we." I hung up feeling a mix of dread and determination. The court date was close, and I needed to stay focused. For the girls, for everything I'd fought to protect. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. I dressed carefully, straightened my tie, and glanced at my reflection. I looked calm, but the storm inside me was relentless. This was it, the day I fought to protect my daughter's stability and the life we'd built together. At the courthouse, Charlene was already there with her lawyer. She looked polished, her demeanor confident. But I could see the tension in her posture, the way her fingers tapped the edge of the table. The judge opened the session, and Charlene's lawyer started first. He painted a picture of a devoted mother unfairly denied equal access to her children. He argued that the girls deserved more time with their mother to strengthen familial bonds. When it was our turn, David was methodical. He presented evidence of the girls' thriving routines, school records, teacher notes, and even letters from Allison's soccer coach. He emphasized that abrupt changes could cause unnecessary stress, especially after everything the family had been through. Finally, I spoke. I told the court about the routines I'd maintained, the time I devoted to making sure the girls felt secure and loved. "This isn't about keeping them from their mother," I said. "It's about giving them the consistency they need to grow and heal." The judge didn't make a decision right away, reserving the ruling for later. As I left the courthouse, I felt both drained and relieved. I had done everything I could. At home, Grace ran to hug me, and Allison asked how it went. "We'll know soon," I told them, forcing a smile. "But no matter what, we'll be okay." In that moment, surrounded by my girls, I realized something important. This wasn't just about custody or court rulings. It was about showing them what love, strength, and resilience looked like. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't stop fighting for them.